It's 4:05. Good afternoon, towards evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for filling in this room. We were initially worried, like, will there be anyone here? But thank you so much for coming to this very interesting topic. We have today a panel session that will talk about pharmacogenomics testing for all, lessons from PRECISE, and also future considerations. My name is Astrid Arwanto, co-founder and chief operating officer at NalaGenetics. Please bear with me for another 5 minutes for me to kind of introduce a little bit of NalaGenetics before we start the panel. Right. So NalaGenetics is a startup that was spun out of the Genome Institute of Singapore, A-STAR, back in 2018. I was back then a postdoctoral fellow and what they call as an innovation fellow at that time. They incubated me there. We were working together, 4 of us co-founders. Initially was part of my PhD work discovering a genetic marker associated with a adverse reaction of a drug for this disease called leprosy. You guys probably haven't seen it around. It's a rare disease for on the skin in the endemic areas that are still lack of hygiene. And apparently this biomarker was the highest prevalence in my home country, Indonesia. The highest was actually in the Papua, East Indonesia. So we thought of really like bringing this out of just a research publication that was in a high impact journal, but there was zero impact to the patients. And so we started off with a simple business model that evolved into a multi-gene panel for pharmacogenomics. And now Nala has evolved beyond pharmacogenomics. But we have been, we're still like tinkering around pharmacogenomics, because as you have heard from a lot of the speakers, especially today, it's just like the technology can be further refined. The way we predict, personalization of medicine may not be just using genetics. And so we had a poster yesterday, and if you haven't actually seen it, we have copies over there about us trying to develop further and refine together with some of the public institutions here on long-read sequencing, on how to actually tackle some of the issues in the pharmacogenes. So, so as I mentioned to you, Nala's mission really is now building a genetic interpretation ecosystem for preventive care. So besides doing just pharmacogenomics, we are venturing out to risk prediction, which is also bread and butter for myself and JJ, being in the human genetics field. So we are focusing a lot on bioinformatics algorithms and clinical reporting, which is where we focus our attention on. Maybe just going on to, Here we have initially the pharmacogenomics products, which we call RX Ready, and it doesn't. Okay, it's okay. It just doesn't bounce off the screen. And RX Ready and RX Max, that's compatible for qPCR and microarrays. But we have been working on a lot on breast cancer risk prediction and cardiovascular that we've launched this year. And a lot of our clients still want to know what about their nutrition, what about their lifestyle. So we have non-clinical genetic products over there as well. And in development with some of the key opinion leaders in Singapore and in Southeast Asia, we're working on other cancers as well as neurodegenerative diseases. Right, so we also have this patient-facing mobile app that you kindly heard a lot from Elaine Lo. Thank you so much. We have actually this PRECISE CIP project that we've been working on together, and hopefully we can deliver more through this app. And in Singapore, we focus a lot on clinical delivery through our clinical laboratory. But actually in Indonesia, we focus a lot on clinical service through the GPs and specialists that we have in our own clinic. So rather than clinical services that we do, we actually have a clinic instead in Indonesia that does the genetic interpretation of our reports and the short-term and long-term care for the patients and individuals that come to our door. And also, in international markets, we have laboratories that work together with us on reporting. They have their own system, but they don't have a clinical reporting. So we work together. They kind of like white label. They put their own logo on our software, and we do that as well and customize for them too. Yeah, and that's all I actually want to say. And so without further ado, let's actually start the panel. I'll bring over our moderator, Dr. Mar Gonzalez, to the stage together with our panelists, Dr. Liuh Ling, Dr. Elaine Lo, and Ibu Indri, to take your seats. Let me introduce our moderator, Dr. Mar Gonzalez-Porta. She is the Vice President of the R&D at NalaGenetics, and she collaborates with the wet lab and dry lab, which is the data analysis. She also has the clinical studies team that improves the performance of NalaGenetics' predictive genetic solution. And this helps to broaden our use case applications. Before joining NalaGenetics, she contributed to the SG10K Genomes Project in Singapore and the 100K Genomes Project in the UK, so totaling about 10 years of experience in the field of human genetics. So I'll pass the session to Mar to introduce our speakers.
Thank you so much, Astrid, and welcome everyone. We have indeed an exciting session ahead discussing implementation of pharmacogenomics with 3 experts in the field representing efforts in Singapore and Indonesia. But before we jump into the questions, I thought I would take a minute to just introduce each of our panelists today. So starting with Dr. Elaine Lo. Dr. Elaine is a principal clinical pharmacist at National University Hospital, as well as an adjunct assistant professor at the National University of Singapore. Now, Dr. Elaine, as you may have heard this morning from her talk on the work on the PRECISE clinical implementation pilot, she's one of the key players in advancing implementation of pharmacogenomics in Singapore. And we know her also at NALA because of the work we've been doing together to develop the mobile app to return results to the study participants in the PRECISE CIP. So hoping to be able to discuss a bit more about that experience, Dr. Elaine. We're also very honored to have with us Indri Rooslamiati. So Indri is Acting Director of the National Biomedical Genome Science Institute, or BBGenomica for short, under MOH in Indonesia. She's also a pharmacist by training, and currently she's driving efforts to deliver population genomics within Indonesia under the BGSI project, and including pharmacogenomics reporting, which is also an area where we're also working together with NALA in terms of providing algorithms for data analysis. Last but not least, we've got with us Dr. Liuh Ling Goh. She's the lab director at the Molecular Diagnostic Lab of Tock Seng Hospital in Singapore, where she oversees the setting up, the actual operations of all the clinical testing, biobanking, and research that happens at the hospital, including PGX testing for the PRECISE clinical implementation pilot. And we've crossed paths also with Dr. Ling and Nala as part of the clinical implementation pilot for PRECISE. We currently have a project on trying to push the accuracy of what can be done in terms of PGX reporting with long reads, which I'm personally quite passionate about, with some very promising results around CYP2D6 and detecting complex alleles that include SVs or hybrids that get missed with more traditional methods. So perhaps that's also another topic that we can also touch base on. All right, so welcome everyone. And without further ado, I think I would like to kick off the conversation perhaps with Dr. Elaine. So Dr. Elaine, this morning you explained in a lot of detail the work that's been happening within the PRECISE clinical implementation pilot for pharmacogenomics. Perhaps could you quickly recap for us what has been achieved, and most importantly, why is this significant and important to consider?
Yeah, so a quick recap of our major advances for the clinical implementation pilot grant. Right now, we have started as part of the PRECISE clinical implementation pilot grant process. We got this pharmacogenomics that's done preemptively within different hospitals in Singapore. So not just within NUHS, which is National University Health System, we also got involvement from Think Health as well as NHG. And we have about more than now close to 2,000 patients being recruited for preemptive pharmacogenomics testing. And in this preemptive pharmacogenetic testing, we cover 16 genes. Actually, we returned 16 genes. There are more genes that are in the microarray panel. And the test is done at Link's site at Tock Seng Hospital. Results returned to individual hospitals, and in particular within the NUHS system itself, we fire clinical decision support tools called best practice advisories, abbreviated as BPA, in the system to guide prescribing for 31 drug gene pairs as of today. So we so far has more than 2,000 prompts being fired in the system, but not all of them are the interruptive prompts that go into your face to say, hey, change the prescription. There are about 198 of them for about 100 patients, but some of these patients have been taking drugs already, so not entirely new drugs. So in the end, so far we have about 30 prescriptions that are changed based on these prompts itself. So we're beginning to see preemptive pharmacogenomics impacting patient care at the clinical level from the clinical implementation pilot grant. So that's a quick recap of what we have achieved so far. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elaine. All right, would like to shift the conversation to Bu Indri, because we know that the PGSI POPSIC program in Indonesia is also looking at pharmacogenomics implementation. Maybe Bu Indri, would you mind describing a bit more about the plans, as well as what made you consider pharmacogenomics as one of the type of results that you would like to be returning to patients?
Yeah, so thank you, Mark. So before I answer your questions, I think I will explain a bit more about the PGSI, because we are the youngest child in the family of population health, population genomics. So in Indonesia, we have this initiative 2 years ago. So what we want to do is that we would like to have or advance the capacity of the nations to have the database that based on the Indonesian populations. And then what we like to deliver is more to the better quality services and also the product that can represent from the Indonesian populations. So what we are focusing at the moment is more to several diseases that has the big burdens for Indonesia, for example, for tuberculosis, stroke, and then the cardiovascular, and then also the other hand is the cancers. So we have 9 hubs, which is the vertical hospitals under the Ministry of Health. So we are not forcing, but we are encourage them to have the services that based on the genomics that can detect for the diseases from the preventions, and also that can give a better treatment for the patients with the approach of the precision medicine. And for the pharmacogenomics, I think as Elaine said, that now we are in the proof of concept. So we currently, I think we already collect more than 700, 600 samples and then sequence more than 3,000 samples. We just started early this year in January. So we're thinking that what can we give or what can we return the result to the patients, because this is still in the proof of concept or that still in the research environments. So we decided to give the pharmacogenomics the report to the patients as that they can see, and then also we can educate the doctors relating to that. So I think that is one of the reason why we like to have the results as the pharmacogenomics to give it to the patients.
Thank you so much, Bu Indri. Yeah, perhaps a bit of a newer program, but equally ambitious in terms of number of samples.
Indeed, yes. So we try to make something impossible become possible. So.
Perfect. All right, so maybe one question for Dr. Ling as well, going back to the PRECISE implementation pilot. So Dr. Elaine has mentioned microarray as a testing platform. What were the considerations to choose one testing platform, and how has been the experience so far?
When we decided to choose a particular platform, there are actually several considerations, like whether it is future-proof, because previously when we are running a smaller panel based on Tecman chemistry, every time you need to add a new marker, you have to order a new assay. So it becomes quite painful in that process to add more markers. So it has to be future-proof. The array actually allows us to put in up to like 600,000 biomarkers. 2,000 plus are focused on pharmacogenomics. So we may not report everything today, but when there's a need to add in new drug gene pairs, we can always go back to the array and check the performance of a particular probe. And then once clinically validated, we can always add on to the panel. So that's one consideration. Other consideration obviously would be cost, the turnaround time, how difficult it is to deploy in the laboratory.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Ling. All right, so would like to shift the topic now a bit more. We've seen what has been done to date. Perhaps to understand a bit more about barriers, challenges that you've been encountering along the way, and some strategies that have been successful in overcoming some of these barriers, perhaps some pending work that remains ahead. So starting with Dr. Elaine, you've been testing now, you've been reporting thousands of samples, you mentioned, so above 1,000, close to 2,000 samples. In your experience, what have been some of the main barriers and how have you been able to navigate around or address those blockers that may have come up along the way?
So thanks for the question. So giving me the opportunity to rant a bit. I think the first thing is we, pharmacists believe that genomics does play a role in drug response, but then we do not see it being used clinically every day. So part of the challenge is how we do things reactively. You have a drug, you need to test a drug, wait for results to return, and then you go back and say, okay, now we can use the drug or we need to do something else. So that relies on clinicians to be aware of the drug-gene interaction, relies on clinician to offer the test, relies on clinician to explain to the patient, and relies on patient to say yes to it. So it makes the whole thing very complicated. That's why we're doing it a little bit differently through the preemptive approach. So we recruit patients for testing, and that takes away the question of whether to test or not, takes away the dependence on doctor to remember or to offer the test, takes away the dependence on the patient to say, yes, I will pay for this test. So taking a preemptive approach helps to bypass a lot of these barriers, but preemptive approach still has its own barrier. Say, for example, our clinical research coordinators try to offer this test to patients waiting at the clinic. Nowadays, with the high rate of scam, people do not take these very easily. So our cold call rate is about like 10 to 20%, even when it's free and it helps with your future prescribing. So we identify clinician champions who help to refer patients in the clinic. So these clinician champions are from different specialties like neurology, cardiology, oncology, and we also have Dr. Hui-Lin in the room from pediatrics, and we're going to roll this out in pediatrics. So when the doctor told the patient that, okay, there is a free panel that will help with your future prescribing, potentially to avoid some of the drug interactions or some of the side effects, patients are willing to say yes to it, and then the recruitment rate goes up to 70 to 90% in terms of recruitment. So that's one of the barriers and how we try to overcome it. And then the other barrier is in terms of the clinical implementation. So when the results come back, traditionally, doctors need to look at the report and think, oh, okay, this drug might be metabolized by CYP2D6, and then maybe I cut the dose a bit for this drug. So in order to help with that, we have best practice advisories in the system, as mentioned. So it delivers this point of care advisory to the doctors. Of course, best practice advisory is associated with another set of problems like alert fatigue. There are many advisories in the system, not just pharmacogenomics related. There are like allergy, like high potassium level, and then remember to order like a creatinine test. Yeah, so these prompts tends to be dismissed if clinicians do not understand their importance. So another part of our work is really going to educate and to train the workforce to use this knowledge in optimizing care, and so that the BPA prompts do not become another prompt that's dismissed in the system with some of the other prompts. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elaine. And following up on the first point of preemptive PGX, that comes with decisions on which genes to test for. What was the process like to narrow it down to a set of genes for reporting in the first iteration?
Thanks for that question. Oh, do you want to take that? I can do the first part and you do the second part. Yeah, so we had this scoring system. So we look at what is the consequence to the interaction. So if the reaction kills you, then it got prioritized higher. So for example, is hypersensitivity reaction, myelosuppression got a higher score. If it's more stomach acid, it got lower down on the list. And then we look at the prevalence of the variant in the population. So if the Asian population doesn't even carry that variant itself, then it goes lower on the list. And of course, we need to be using the drug in the system. There are some drugs on the initial list from the literature scan that's not even being prescribed here, and they got taken away. And we also look at whether there's a means to test the gene, and whether, actually very importantly, whether there's guidance from, say, for example, professional bodies or international guidelines as to what to do when you know about a drug-gene interaction. So we don't want to run into the situation that you test and you got a result and you do not know what to do to your drug. So we have like drug-gene pairs with recommendations from CPIC or DPWG to advise what to do before. So for those drug-gene pairs, they got rated higher as well, because we know how to help the patients when we get the information. And I think Ling can help to supplement on the part of variant selection.
You basically cover a lot. Okay, maybe just add on a little bit. Actually, when we, I think both institutions, come up with the gene list, it turns out to be like 90% concordance. More or less, we have the same thing because they were based on clinical evidence and prevalence. Prevalence not just looking at public databases. At the time, we also look at the SG10K databases, see whether indeed these are relevant to our local population. And the lab will also consider the AMP tiering recommendation, those in the tier 1, tier 2, or whether they're relevant in our population or not. Then if they meet both criteria, then they have to be in the panel.
Thank you so much. Maybe one more question on the PRECISE program, and then we'll jump back to BGSI. So perhaps for Dr. Ling, what's the experience of running the clinical lab to do PGX testing for more than 1,000 samples? What's that been like? Any lessons learned throughout the process? Any changes that you've had to implement along the way, for example?
I think one lesson that we learned is it's really on how to return the results to the clinician back to the medical record. For NUHS and NHG, we were both on Epic, right? But somehow the result won't flow because the lab used different lab information system. So that became a pain for us. Even within the same cluster within NHG, we also realized even on the same LIS, right? Also sometimes the result won't flow because the lab result component will built slightly differently in different formats, so it won't flow. So one lesson we learned is we have to align early how we want to do the reporting, because if we don't report as discrete data, then you won't be able to fire the PPA. And within the lab, there's also another challenge. We used to report like single drug gene pair. You're just entering one genotype and then you have a phenotype. It's not too difficult to do it manually, but now you need to run thousands of samples, and each report you have 16 drug gene pairs to enter. I try it, it takes me like half an hour just to enter 10 reports, and at the end of the day, I also see star news. Yeah, really see stars, after entering all the study. So we did come up with an interim solution, and I'm really very thankful for the RPA team in TTSH that helped us to come up with the algorithm. So we have a robot to do that transcription into the system. That robot has a name, it's called Helisa. Thankfully, take away that manual transcription work from us. But that is an interim solution. I think to scale up further, looking at 450,000 in phase 3, RPA might not be the best solution. Yeah, Helisa doesn't work very fast sometimes.
Elisa can work overnight, 24/7. No need to.
Yes, but then sometimes she just hang. I don't know why.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ling. I think that this may have been a better panel discussion title, Seeing the Stars, for next time. All right, shifting things back to Indonesia, Bu Indri. What are some insights you think could be learned from the experience so far in Singapore versus what do you think may be some unique challenges to the Indonesian ecosystem?
Okay, so at least I haven't seen so many stars like Dr. Goh did. So yeah, so I think what we can learn from the PRECISE, there are so many things that we can learn and also we can avoid, right? So what we can learn the first is that how you can implement this, because like from our last night discussion that you say you already implemented since 2018, right? And we just started. And I think what Elaine said in the beginning is about how the involvement of the clinicians, because that I think that will be one of the challenges that we're gonna have. Because like if we're gonna roll out this the PGX reports, then does the clinicians want to use it? Like, and then if they want to use it, and what are the guidance that we can give it to them? Like, even though we have like the national formularia for Indonesians for like list of drugs, and also we have the dictionary for the pharmaceutical and medical devices that can also include it into the pharmacogenomic list. But I think the key is that how the clinician can use this and how the patients can understand. So therefore, I think for the educations and also how we can send the message to the patients and also to the clinician, that will be the biggest challenges for us. So therefore, for the proof of concept, we started from the 10 hospitals, which is that I think it's also same as the precisions that Elaine said, that it's on the scheme of the BGSI program. So we don't need to ask the patient to pay for the test. So all included into the BGSI program. So at least we can return something to them. And also how to convince the regulatory, how to convince the governments. I mean, like, we are the governments, but we also have like, other government that give us the funding to do this program. So I think it's very hard, not very hard, but it's very challenging, because like they will say that, oh yeah, the pharmacogenomics, genomics is very expensive. Indonesia, we don't need that at the moment. It's like we still have so many things that we need to solve. So how I think our team here, I have 4 angels here, so we all women's. How we convince the regulatory, how we convince the government to make them understand that this program is actually effective and also efficient, and we need this to be sustained, not only 1-2 years, but for the whole year. So if they can understand this, I think they are the first person that we.
What may be still the gaps that are needing to be addressed before those make it into clinical implementation? Because it may take a while to go from research all the way to clinic.
I think to scale up in terms of testing, go for automation, right? Because if there are too many manual steps, then it could be very prone to errors. So that's one thing I'm always very worried about, mixing up samples or, getting wrong results. That would be disastrous. So that's non-negotiable accuracy first. And in terms of gaps, I think the hospitals need to have that data infrastructure ready, because we're looking at storing huge large numbers of files, data files for a period of time, so that has to be ready. Whether the test is done in-house or perhaps outsourced to a commercial lab, there must be some means for the results to come back to the system. How do you want to do it? Like for example, even right now, we're supposed to send NUHS back the raw data file, but our SFTP takes 1 year to get approval. By the way, still not approved. Yeah. So these are things to think about. And pre-cluster, you don't want to report the results differently, right? Correct. So there also, I think the different lab stakeholders have to come, sit together, come down and discuss how we want to harmonize the reporting. Yeah.
Perfect. I think you've already helped me with the next question to Dr. Elaine as well, on touching on some of the challenges to go from implementing in one cluster to multiple clusters. But maybe anything else you would like to add, Dr. Elaine?
Yeah, so I think Indri had this very interesting approach where it's more top-down, whereas ours is more like bottom-up. Like we go to the clinical board to present and say whether we can do this. So I think it's met with resistance at some of the clusters when we're trying to involve the other clusters in this program. It's easier from our side because it's our CE who wants it. But then from the other clusters, it's like, hey, are you interested? Come and join. Those clusters are more cautious in implementing it. And then they have questions like, oh, why is it not from MOH? If it's from MOH from the ministry, then it's way easier to push through. So not sure, like in the future, as this pharmacogenomics knowledge got more mature, or the use of it in the clinic is more mature and more well established, if the ministry can come in and say, okay, we're going to mainstream it, and then these are the recommendations, please take it, then it will definitely help with some of our implementation work.
Thank you so much. Maybe touching a bit on the actual testing method. So we've talked about microarrays before, Dr. Ling. BGSI, they're currently doing short read sequencing at 30x. How do you foresee that evolving? Do you think microarray would be a platform to continue testing on, perhaps well suited for scale? Would you recommend or perhaps consider alternatives like short read sequencing? We've talked about long read sequencing sometimes. Maybe can you comment a bit on all the different options?
What a difficult question.
It wasn't in the list, right? For the questions.
My personal feeling, maybe this one should not be video. There's no single platform that is perfect for everything. So I think it depends on the application. If you ask me, we are just returning pharmacogenetics result, I think the microarray will serve very well, or even let's say we want to add on PRS in future, it should also serve very well. But if someone say, okay, I want a return of, let's say results for BRCA for cancer patient, then I don't think it's a suitable platform, because for that probably you need a sequencing approach, because you need to sequence the entire gene. So it really depends on the application. I don't have an answer for that. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Indri, not sure if you'd like to add anything in the context of Indonesia.
Yeah, I think for Indonesia now, because like we would like to really returning the result to the patients, and what we're doing now is that in the hospitals they have the targeted sequencing, and then we're doing the whole genome sequencing. And what Dr. Goh said, that for the data infrastructure, so I think currently now we are in the right path. So each hospitals, they have their own data, it's on cloud, and then we also have the data on cloud, and all is on Ministry of Health. So at least like all the data for the sequencing, all the data for the demography, the clinical data, as well as the biobank, they are all into one system, and they are all links. So that's what we are doing at the moment as a proof of concept. So hopefully it can be replicated to more bigger networking.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and there's lots of talk around data storage, right? Increasing volumes of data as well, potentially being one of the challenges. I wonder, are there any conversations around reanalysis of results as new guidelines or new gene drug associations get discovered?
I'm not sure whether there's a standard guideline or like the frequency to go back and relook at the results, but then we do have a policy that we try to relook into it, like if possible, at least once a year. Yeah. It's our internal.
Can I ask? So does it change some of the reports?
If you receive an amended report from me, that means we are looking, we're working on it.
Please let me know. Yeah.
Action item. Thank you so much. All right, so 10 hospitals in Indonesia, that's quite an impressive number. Dr. Elaine has alluded to some of the challenges in terms of...
We have 3,000 hospitals.
Oh, 3,000 hospitals,
Yes.
oh dear. Okay, got the number wrong. Right, so what are some of the strategies that you're adopting to try to keep them aligned in terms of genes that are being tested, guidelines that are being reported?
Yeah, I think the first is that, now we're doing the proof of concept, so hopefully we can get like the very good system or good model that we can replicate to other hospitals. And the second one, I think what Dr. Goh said is that how we can move from research environment to the clinical applications. So for that, I think labs in Indonesia, they need to have like certain accreditations from the CAP, and then those kind of things. And then also the third one will be more to the community engagements and then the educations to all the healthcare workers. And I think the last one will be not only related to pharmacogenomics. I think we're also thinking about the genetic counselors, right? Because I think the result of this, it should be talk to the patients in a manner way. So I think we need to also think about how these professions can be the health profession, because now I think that I think in Singapore it's not really included in the healthcare workers as well for the genetic consults, if I'm not mistaken, because in Indonesia we haven't put it in place still. Yeah.
So in Singapore, we stratify genetics test into several tiers. So for say tier 1, they feel that the tests are simple enough, so you don't need a genetic counselor or a specialist to order it, to interpret it, or to counsel the patient. So most of the pharmacogenomics tests, including the preemptive pharmacogenomics panel itself, falls under tier 1.
Okay.
And then tier 2, then you start to have to perform, say, pre or post-test counseling, and then you might have to get a genetic counselor in, kind of thing.
Okay, got it. So the certification based on the risk.
Okay, thank you so much, Indri. All right, so I've got one last question for each of you. So same question to each of you before we open up for questions from the audience as well. And this is looking ahead in terms of scaling up PGX implementation to promote wider adoption. If you had one wish that could be fulfilled, what is the one critical thing that you think can help you in scaling up this type of testing? What would that be?
Maybe I go first. For me, it's still the same thing, that the data will flow, okay? That is non-negotiable, Different cluster is okay, but we are all at Epic. It should flow. We should not be doing manual transcription from PDF report.
No more robots either.
Better automation.
For me, it would be patient recruitment. I think in phase 3, there's a lofty goal of SG 500K, right? But then I'm looking at the number of patients that got prescription in my hospital each year. It's about 200,000. Yeah, so 200,000 unique patients in a hospital every year. And then if you're trying to hit a goal of 500K, I think a lot of them would have to say yes to testing for us to hit that goal, at least from the NUHS cluster point of view. Yeah, so processes that would help with recruitment. So for example, automating the blood taking process, having e-consent so that they can go to a website or use the app to sign themselves up, socializing the idea to the community. All these would help. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think these two ladies already mentioned, but maybe I would like to add some, like, because now we are trying to make this in one system. So, because like we have the people health app called Satu Sehat in Indonesia. So we're trying to make the recruitment, everything into this one app. And then we will put the result of pharmacogenomics into their app. So like everybody that is the participants of our program, so they can open the app and they can know the result, at least for the pharmacogenomics at the moment. So what I want to have is, I think, the sustainability of this program, and also how we can deliver more results to the patient, because at the end of the day, what we want is that they can have a better treatment. So our aims for the precision medicine that can be achieved.
Perfect. So we've got data integration, patient recruitment, and sustainability. Thank you so much. All right, I think at this point, we'll open up for questions from the audience.
Thanks very much. I think just to follow up from Bu Indri's comments about sustainability, and I'm not sure if the ladies on the panel can answer this question, but do you know whether or not, like, who pays for these tests? Currently, I think because we have a grant, we're able to do this, but if we prove that this works, PGX works, then in future, how is that going to be implemented, integrated into like the clinical practice of who pays for it? Thank you.
We don't have an answer actually. It could be out of patient's pocket, it could be subsidized. So we need the top level people to decide whether this is going to be subsidized.
To be honest, we don't know.
Compared to the test done today, who funds the test today? Like the regular stuff that you do when the clinicians ask for it.
Okay, actually for routine single gene test, right, it's mostly out of patient pocket. There's only one test that is subsidized, is the 1502 for carbamazepine. For the panel, if it's patients are recruited under the CIP, then the grant will pay. But this panel is also available for ordering, right? Sometimes we do have clinicians, they say they want to order 2 genes, CYP2D6 and CYP2C19. Mostly, I think for the SSRI, yeah, they will need 2 genes, right? Then we will advise them, don't order 2 single genes, it's actually more expensive, order the panel, yeah.
And then they'll pay for it.
Yes.
For us, it's still funded by the government, because this is still a program from the government, so at least until next year's. And yeah, that's why I think our main goal is to convince them if this can be like a part of that the government can cover, but we don't know yet. Wish us luck.
But I would say if we're continuing with the microarray, which is like 450 per
400, not 450.
Okay,
Maybe
400.
I don't know. You pocket an extra $50.
Yeah, we need to do the lab reporting and also cherry pick and send to your. Yeah. But then a lot of tests. Say for example, single gene testing, it's already in the realm of $100 to $200. If you need like 2 drugs on the panel itself, then might as well do panel already. And also to compare that with other tests, say for example, if you do the full liver function test, it's about $80. And then you need to do a liver function test like regularly to monitor your liver function, right? That means you have to maybe do it a few times over your life. But then for this microarray panel, most of the time your genes do not change. You just supposedly just do it once over your life. So I think if we try to think about cost in this way, it becomes more palatable and more like people might be more willing to pay for it. And we have also conducted cost-effectiveness analysis, which shows that, say for example, if the panel is pitched at say $140 per panel, it becomes dominant, which means it's both better and cheaper. But then say, for example, if it's costed at 400, you have ICER incremental cost effectiveness ratio of about $7,000, which is still below some of the quoted willingness to pay threshold of 50,000 Singaporean dollars per kali. So I think in the future, people may be willing to pay for it, and if the evidence and the lobbying is good enough, we might convince the government to help pay for it.
Pauline, how much would you pay for the test?
Depends how much. I guess it really depends how much it saves my life, right?
How much would you pay for your hair? You compare, people are willing to pay a few $100s to, to do
a good question.
to reborn and to color the hair. Why aren't they paying for the panel?
Thank you. Any questions? All right.
Thank you very much for a beautiful discussion. I'm taking the comment on the cost again. If, let's say, the cost is $500 on my first test, if I come for the second time, is the cost still the same if we are still using the same data? Or are you decreasing the cost as I continuously use the same data so that possibly eventually the cost effectiveness will be... I'm trying to see how we can sell this to policymakers in terms of you still now accessing the same data, but maybe the cost continues now to go down. Thank you.
I'm trying to understand, why do you need to do the test the second time?
Okay, so I'm saying I might not need to do the test the second time, but I might need to be in the hospital the second time. So the doctors can still access my results. So wouldn't that make the value of the test now going down, because you are not doing as much as you did on the first test, where you had to go through all the other processes? Now it's just pulling out from the database.
Okay, I think I get what he meant. If you are just like reanalyzing a result, or you want to perhaps look for results that are not reported during your first test,
Yes.
I think it depends on the lab policy, how much they want to charge you. For me, I will probably wouldn't charge you the full rate of running the test, but there will be an additional charge for reanalyzing the data or look at other data, because that also takes our time.
Lovely.
Yeah, yes.
If I can pose just one last one, can you comment on the idea that there is a requirement that we need for pharmacogenomic tests? We need to show like randomized trials to show that they are effective. Is that the way to go in terms of bringing a test to say now we're going to use this test? Do we have to go that much in terms of the evidence we have to show for the utility of the test? I'm always thinking about how,
Personally, I think it's important to show the clinical utility. It doesn't have to be performed in my lab, but we can always quote, papers that people have shown that this is, this is relevant, this is scientific.
Yeah, so if I can add, I think we have this called the health technology assessment, right? So if there is like a new technology, and then if there is like technology that can give benefits to the patients, then I think we can get the data from the study, and we can show if it's effective and efficient. Then we can endorse that in Indonesia. We have this kind of committee for the health technology assessment, and then they will assess that. And then if they think that this is good enough, and then they will endorse this to the health insurance, so it can be covered, or it can be replaced like the current practice that's ongoing.
I think there are evidence out there to show that preemptive pharmacogenomics is effective. So for example, the PREPARE study that was done in the European countries with a 12-gene preemptive pharmacogenomics panel, that has been shown to reduce clinically relevant adverse effects, drug effects by 30%. But the ingenious study done in the States did not show the same kind of benefit. largely because of the recruitment problem and the change in the methodology. So I'd say eventually you still need to prove your technology or your intervention to be beneficial for it to make sense to be implemented in the healthcare system. But the question is, what is the threshold of evidence that you need before you'll act? So do you need a RCT, randomized controlled study, or retrospective study, modeling study, good enough already? So a lot of things that we're doing clinically in our clinical practice actually do not reach the RCT standard. For example, renal dose adjustment, drug-drug interactions, how many RCTs are there, but then we're always doing that every day in our daily practice. So that's some of the things that I think about a lot. But eventually, my boss also asked me to prove that preemptive pharmacogenomics help to reduce ADR in our clinical setting with the next phase of implementation. Now it's more like pathfinding, but then in the next phase, this is some of the things we're looking at to show the value of the preemptive pharmacogenomics panel itself.
We have early adopter.
Yes, one question.
Hi, I'm Hui Lin from NUH. Yeah, nice discussion. Love it. Thank you. We have early adopters, like patients who have previously been over the years paying for clinical pharmacogenomic testing before. Like, I'm a clinical geneticist, so when they do whole genome sequencing, people have had paid for them. And so there will be all these historical records. Is there a plan within PRECISE to be able to integrate these for the early adoptees into their health records so that the BPAs can equally be fired? And my second question is, we have a lofty target of 500,000 people. Do we have aims to extend this towards the community? Thank you.
Maybe on the first question, I'm not sure whether WES, it depends on what pharmacogenes you are looking at, because a lot of pharmacogenes, the SNPs are actually in the intron region, so you might not be able to fish them out from the WES. Yeah, so it depends on what you're looking at. Yeah, and whether PRECISE want to use that data, I'm not too sure.
It exists as PDF copies of the patient records that we have to remember to pull out every time.
Yeah, actually not just your WES. There are a lot of single gene testing. Done
or the send to in data, or in PDF.
in the system lying around.
Before this thing came out, right?
Yeah,
We need a solution,
Yeah, I'm working very hard to incorporate some of those historical single gene testing, but then there are a lot of technical issues into that. It's not like we don't want to waste people's money and blood to retest again. Yeah, but then technically very challenging. We are working hard one way or another to hope to make this possible. I know in the States there are hospitals which allow clinicians to key in themselves. Say, for example, you do a test outside and then you got your CYP2C19 results. They allow clinicians or patients to return the results into the system itself to fire some of these best practice advisory. But then it comes to the question whether I can trust the direct-to-consumer test, and then whether I trust the clinician to enter correctly or the patient to enter correctly. Yeah, then there are questions around that.
Perfect, thank you so much. I'm afraid we've reached our time and will soon be politely asked to leave the room. So please join me in thanking our panelists, Bu Indri, Dr. Elaine, Dr. Liuh. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you everyone for attending.